The terminal buzzed with travelers rushing to their destinations, announcements echoing overhead, and the faint scent of coffee drifting from the nearby cafe. Among the sea of passengers stood Marcus Ellison, a tall, sharply dressed black man whose tailored suit and calm demeanor radiated quiet confidence. To the average onlooker, he could have easily been mistaken for just another business traveler. What they didn't know was that Marcus wasn't just successful. He was one of the youngest and most respected CEOs in the country, the founder of a rapidly growing technology firm valued in the billions. Marcus had just wrapped up a week of meetings overseas and was eager to return home. He had purchased a first-class ticket for the flight, a well-earned comfort after endless days of negotiations, presentations, and networking dinners. With his boarding pass in hand, he approached the gate, prepared for the usual priority boarding process reserved for first-class passengers. But as Marcus stepped forward, the gate agent, a middle-aged woman with a rigid posture and narrowed eyes, glanced at him skeptically. Her gaze lingered longer than necessary on his skin tone and then flicked down to his boarding pass. She frowned. "I'm sorry, sir," she said flatly, her voice laced with doubt. "First class is for premium passengers only. You need to step aside and wait for your boarding group." Marcus blinked, momentarily caught off guard. He had traveled extensively and rarely faced this level of direct condescension. Calmly, he responded, "This is a first-class boarding pass. I believe I'm in the right line." The woman's lips tightened. "I think you're mistaken. This ticket doesn't belong to you. First class is reserved for our priority travelers. You should go back and wait with general boarding." A few nearby passengers turned their heads, sensing the tension. Marcus's jaw clenched, but his voice remained composed. "Ma'am, this ticket was issued directly to me. Perhaps you could scan it again and verify?" Rather than check, the agent crossed her arms defensively. "Sir, don't cause a scene. People try to sneak into first class all the time, and I'm not about to let that happen here." The implication was clear. She didn't believe he could possibly belong in that section of the plane. The sting of her prejudice was sharp, but Marcus had long ago learned the power of patience and composure. He took a steady breath, unwilling to stoop to anger, at least not yet. Behind him, whispers started spreading through the line. Some passengers exchanged knowing glances, while others shook their heads at the obvious injustice. Marcus felt every eye on him, the humiliation of being treated like an imposter simply because of who he was. Still, he stood tall, his deep voice steady. "I assure you this ticket is valid. I suggest you double-check before making assumptions." The agent scoffed, muttering under her breath about entitled people, and refused to move. That was when Marcus decided this incident would not end with him being silently dismissed. He was about to make a decision that would change not only his flight, but the fate of the entire airline. Marcus could feel his patience wearing thin, but he wasn't the kind of man to allow ignorance to dictate his dignity. Years of leading boardrooms and negotiating with world leaders had taught him one valuable lesson. The most powerful person in the room is the one who remains calm under pressure. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. The gate agent watched him with suspicion, her eyebrows raised as if to say, "What do you think you're doing?" She didn't realize Marcus was not a man to be underestimated. He pressed a name on his screen, and after 2 rings, a commanding voice answered. "Marcus, I didn't expect to hear from you today," the man said warmly. "Good afternoon, Richard," Marcus replied evenly. "I wish I was calling under better circumstances. I'm at the airport, attempting to board my flight, but I'm being denied access to my first-class seat. The staff seems convinced I don't belong here." The voice on the other end grew instantly serious. "What? That's outrageous. Which airline?" Marcus glanced at the agent, whose smirk faltered when she noticed the sudden shift in his tone. "Your airline," Marcus said pointedly. There was a long pause. The man on the other end wasn't just anyone. He was Richard Coleman, CEO of the entire airline corporation. He also happened to be a longtime business associate of Marcus, someone who admired his leadership and had even sought his advice during tough financial negotiations. Richard's voice hardened. "Stay right where you are. This will be handled immediately." Marcus ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. The agent, still trying to cling to her authority, scoffed. "Calling your friend won't get you into first class, sir. We have rules." But her confidence wavered when her earpiece suddenly crackled with urgent chatter from her supervisors. She stiffened, eyes darting nervously as the voice in her ear grew louder, clearly demanding her attention. "Is there a problem here?" A manager came rushing over, slightly out of breath. His eyes landed on Marcus, then on the gate agent. "What's going on?" This passenger is trying to board first class without authorization," the agent stammered, but her earlier bravado was gone. Marcus didn't need to speak. His calm gaze was enough. The manager's phone buzzed violently, and when he looked at the screen, his face went pale. It was a direct message from corporate headquarters. He read it quickly, then swallowed hard. "Sir," he said to Marcus, his voice trembling with sudden respect, "please allow me to escort you to your seat personally." The surrounding passengers murmured in surprise. The once confident agent stood frozen, her arrogance stripped away as realization dawned that she had made a catastrophic mistake. Marcus gave a small nod and followed the manager, but before he stepped onto the jet bridge, he turned back briefly. His eyes met the gate agent's, and though his words were measured, they carried the weight of justice. "You assumed I didn't belong here. That was your mistake. But you're about to learn just how costly assumptions can be." The woman's face flushed crimson, and her lips parted as if to protest, but no words came out. What Marcus knew, and what she was about to discover, was that his single phone call had already set in motion a chain of events that would shake the very foundation of the airline she worked for. As Marcus walked down the jet bridge, escorted by the visibly nervous manager, whispers followed him. Some passengers exchanged glances, piecing together that this man wasn't just an ordinary traveler. Something about the way the airline staff's attitude had shifted spoke volumes. When Marcus stepped into the first-class cabin, the flight attendants straightened instantly. The manager leaned close to one of them, whispering hurried instructions. Within seconds, Marcus was ushered to his seat, the very one he had paid for, but had been denied moments earlier. A chilled glass of sparkling water appeared on the table beside him, accompanied by apologetic smiles. Marcus reclined into his seat, his expression calm but unreadable. He wasn't celebrating his small victory. To him, this wasn't about gaining access to a seat he had already earned. This was about principle. He had endured the indignity of being judged not by his ticket, his credentials, or his achievements, but by the color of his skin. Meanwhile, back at the gate, the manager was fielding frantic calls from corporate. Richard Coleman, the airline's CEO, had personally ordered an immediate inquiry into the incident. The directive was clear. Every detail had to be reported, and the employee responsible was to be removed from duty immediately. The gate agent's composure cracked completely. Her once arrogant stance gave way to panic as she realized she wasn't simply facing a disgruntled passenger. She had humiliated one of the most influential men in the corporate world, a man with direct ties to her own company's highest leadership. On board, Marcus pulled out his tablet, connecting to the secure network his company maintained. Within minutes, he was drafting a report, documenting the incident in precise detail. He had no need for exaggeration. The facts spoke loudly enough. As he typed, his mind wasn't on revenge, but on the countless others who didn't have the power to make one call and be treated with respect. His thoughts drifted to the young professional who might save up for months to afford a first-class seat, only to be denied it because of someone's prejudice. To the families who deserved dignity while traveling, but instead faced suspicion or outright hostility. Marcus knew he had the means to ensure this wasn't just another forgotten story. The captain of the aircraft, unaware of the earlier drama, soon entered the cabin to greet Marcus personally. "Mr. Reynolds," he said respectfully, "welcome aboard. Please accept our apologies for the treatment you received. It won't happen again." Marcus studied the captain for a moment, then offered a slight nod. "See to it that it doesn't happen to anyone," he replied evenly. The captain's cheeks reddened, but he inclined his head and returned to the cockpit. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Marcus leaned back, his mind already several steps ahead. He knew that by the time they landed, this incident would no longer be a local embarrassment at one airport. It would be a corporate crisis echoing across news outlets, boardrooms, and social media platforms worldwide. As the engines roared and the plane lifted into the night sky, Marcus gazed out of the window, the city lights shrinking beneath him. To any other passenger, this was just another flight, but for him, it symbolized something larger. This wasn't simply about reclaiming his rightful first-class seat. It was about dismantling a system of bias that too many people had quietly endured. By the time the aircraft reached cruising altitude, Marcus's report had already been transmitted securely to both his communications team and the airline's executive office. He knew that within hours, headlines would begin circulating. Black CEO denied boarding despite valid ticket. Social media would do the rest, amplifying the story until no one could ignore it. In first class, the staff hovered attentively, desperate to undo the damage. Gourmet meals, wine pairings, and endless reassurances were offered, but Marcus wasn't interested in their attempts at redemption. He accepted only the essentials, his demeanor calm and collected. His silence was more unnerving to the crew than any outburst would have been. Meanwhile, at airline headquarters, chaos was unfolding. Richard Coleman had convened an emergency board meeting. Legal teams, PR strategists, and senior executives crowded into the conference room, all staring at the forwarded complaint from Marcus Reynolds. The details were damning. An employee had denied boarding to a paying first-class passenger, citing company policy, when in fact, the only policy at play was prejudice. Coleman slammed his hand on the table. "We have built a global brand on the promise of service and equality. If this story breaks the way I know it will, decades of reputation will be destroyed overnight. Fix this immediately." Back on the flight, Marcus received a discreet message from one of his advisors. The airline is preparing a full public apology. He closed the message with a faint smile. For him, apologies were secondary. What mattered was accountability. He intended to ensure systemic change, not just a press release filled with empty words. When the plane landed hours later, Marcus was the first to disembark. Cameras were already waiting at the arrival gate, tipped off by leaks from within the airline itself. Journalists swarmed, asking for his comment. Marcus paused only long enough to make his statement. "No one should have to make a phone call to be treated with basic dignity," he said firmly. "What happened to me happens to people every day. People without a platform, without the resources to defend themselves. That ends today. If this airline wants to continue serving the public, it will adopt real policies of inclusion and accountability. And if they don't, others will." His words spread across every major news outlet within hours. Hashtags trended, civil rights groups issued statements of support, and travelers worldwide shared their own experiences of bias at airports. The airline had no choice but to announce sweeping reforms, including mandatory diversity training, independent oversight, and strict penalties for discriminatory behavior. Marcus didn't dwell on the personal victory. For him, it wasn't about humiliation or revenge. It was about setting a precedent. The incident had revealed a truth. Power and dignity should not be privileges reserved for the few. They are rights owed to everyone. And through his calm but decisive actions, Marcus had forced an entire corporation, and perhaps even an entire industry, to remember that.